gentlemen, welcome to Parents on Pictures podcast. My name's Damien.
And I'm Andy.
And each and every week, what we do is take a film from a streaming platform, Netflix, Amazon Prime, Disney Plus, that sort of thing. And we come in here after watching it and we talk about it and review it. So, Andy, this was my pick this episode.
It was indeed, yeah.
What have we in store today?
So we've been looking at the Platform 2019. It is on Netflix, distributed through Netflix. It's directed by Gauda Gatzelou Arrutu.
Oh,
excuse my butchering of the Catalan name there. But yeah, a sci-fi horror thriller. I mean, I really, and we could talk about this in a minute, but I really struggled to categorize it into a genre.
Yeah, it's the basic premise, the basic plot is two men wake up in a cell and you find out that that cell is one floor amongst what they believe to be 100 or so to begin with. They wake up on floor 48, and in the middle of every floor is a massive hole for a table. And the table descends through the different cells, the different platforms for the prisoners, I would imagine, to feed off of. And that, in a nutshell, is the plot. It's about how these characters deal with the situation they're put into. It's a really basic premise.
It is. I think one of the things to really note here is that it's been adapted from a stage play. So it started off as a play, and I don't know if the play ever got to stage or not. From what I've read about it, I don't think it got that far. But the whole concept was a play, and I think you can see that within the mise en scène, within the characters, and within all of that, it would fit perfectly on stage. The one thing, and I just want to say before we go any further, we are going to cover some spoilers.
Some big ones, I would imagine.
So if you don't want to, if you want to watch this first, stop listening now and then come back to it afterwards once you've watched it, because we are going to be talking about some stuff in terms of spoilers. But I think you can really see how it started on stage. It has that theatrical look about it, and afterwards, when I found that out, I sat there going, "Oh yeah, of course, that makes so much sense," because even the set itself was so static and sane that that fits on stage. That would work very well in that sense.
Yeah, there's nothing to it. It's very plain, which from a filmmaker standpoint is brilliant when it comes to your budget, especially if you have a small one, because you can use the same set, just change the numbers on the wall, and you've got the different platforms. One of the reasons that this film reminds me of a film called The Cube, which is back, I think it was 1997 or thereabouts, is because they only had is very similar setup. People wake up in a cube room and they travel between the different rooms, but they only had 4 cubes. So one of the ways that they fooled the audience into thinking or making them believe that it was bigger than what it actually was, like it was hundreds and hundreds of rooms, was they kept changing the colors of the cubes that they went into, but they actually only had 4. And you can see that it's a very similar setup here. It's like there's a little CGI work when you're looking up through the tower and down through the tower, just to give you a sheer scope of it. But when you're looking at the actual set itself, almost nothing happens outside of these individual rooms.
No, that's correct.
And they're all identical.
I looked into that as well, because they actually only had 2 rooms when they were filming.
Wow.
One on top of one another. So for all the shots where they're looking up, they're in the bottom room. For all the shots where they're looking down, they're in the top room. So again, a really creative use of a restricted budget. And this is, and it's worth noting, this was an independent film, or is an independent film, before Netflix got hold of it. Because although it's on Netflix and Netflix are distributing it, it isn't a Netflix film. They didn't fund this. They found it at a film festival, and it was then distributed from there.
And Netflix do that a lot, which is really cool, because they're giving an opportunity for these smaller films to be seen across a massive audience. And I don't know about obviously your algorithm, because that's how Netflix works. But my Facebook and my Netflix, as soon as this was released, it was flooded with this film.
Yeah.
So it gives an opportunity for small films like this that are winning awards to be seen at a much, much wider audience, as opposed to this would probably have been released on DVD had it gotten a release at all. And I might have found it a few years later because I was looking for something along these lines.
Yeah, and it's the kind of film that you might see being released by Canal Plus in Europe
Mm.
or something like that. And it's nice that it's got that mainstream release, because it's, you know, it's an interesting film in that sense. It's an unusual film, and also with it being subtitled in English, it's in Spanish or Catalan, or I'm not sure which. But with it being in a foreign language film, I think that for it to have that mainstream release is really, really good. One of my students recommended this to me a couple of weeks ago. She sent me an email saying, you need to watch this film. And then I added it to my list and didn't think anything of it. And then every day it was creeping up Netflix now do that top 10.
Yeah.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6. And then you said it, and I think it got to 6 when you said you need to watch it. So like, great, okay, we'll watch it. I'm impressed that it's in the top 10.
True. I mean, even sometimes you can put this in front of people all day long, but they still have to click it, especially with everything that there is to watch on Netflix. And I think that probably says a lot to Netflix's audience, because back when it was kind of first being released, one of the reasons I loved Netflix or preferred Netflix to the likes of Amazon Prime was because they seemed to be releasing or buying and distributing films that were grungy or a bit hard to watch or sci-fi that wouldn't normally get an audience. So they were really championing these smaller films. And that's what drew me to Netflix in the first place, and which is one of the reasons why I love what they're still doing, because they're still championing these small films, but
Absolutely.
people have still got to watch it. And yeah, the fact that it was in the top 10 was brilliant, I thought, because I love this type of film.
And I think that's great, for an independent film that's quite unique, quite hard to categorize in a genre, quite hard to watch in places, not particularly pleasant. I think it's clearly done well, and I hope we get to see more from this director and from this production company, because if they've got more like this up their sleeve, I think that's really positive, really positive.
I'd love to see these types of things come about, especially when they're done so well. And I think because it was such a small scale, they were able to focus on the interaction between the characters, because that's all you've got on screen.
That's the
it.
narrative. That is the narrative. And like I said, when we did Cargo, and we were talking about the fact that the characters are what develop the narrative, it's the same here. It really is. We're looking at two people in a room, and that narrative is driving itself. There's very occasionally we get taken out into a flashback, but ultimately we are in a room with two people. We're flies on a wall, listening to those conversations, watching those interactions, and that's fascinating.
I love it, and it lives and dies on what the characters are doing, what they're saying, how they're saying it. It's all about performance, because there's nothing showy here. I mean, there are moments of graphic violence, but it's in my opinion, it's not overdone. And that would be, again, I've said it before, I think with Cargo, if you have a small budget, the easiest thing to do is lean into things like the gore, because it's cheap, it's easy, and it grabs your attention. Whilst there were horrific violent scenes in this, really unsettling, I don't think it was overplayed, which really helped stay connected to your characters, as opposed to being taken out of what they were doing and how they were struggling to survive and just make it a gore fest.
Right. Yeah, no, I agree to an extent. I think that there was moments where they could have toned it down slightly. I think I probably have a bit more of a sensitive disposition than you do. But there's a moment where the platform, the table's passing through, and they go past like half a body. It looks like it's been cut in half. At that point, I was like, I don't need to see entrails. I don't need to.
No, that's fair. But for me, that keyed into something I was thinking previously in the film, because there are lots of instances where the characters are for all intents and purposes, they're relaxing, they're chilling out as best as you can in this situation. You know, he's got his leg dangling over the edge, looking down the hole and stuff like that. And I was like, we'd seen at one point how the platform returns to the surface and the speed in which it does so.
Yeah.
And that instantly had me thinking, what happens? You know, are we going to see someone get caught in that
Yeah.
speed? And no, you don't see it happen, but you see the after effect of, now the blood was going down as opposed to up. So I can only imagine that that is how somebody met their gruesome end. One of the, one of the not so friendly, prisoners would have held them in place and allowed the table to come down on top of them. But it was playing on my mind all the time. Every time I saw somebody dangling over that edge, I was like, don't do that. Just don't.
There's a moment where right at the very end, the table's gone down and they've reached that bottom basement part, and he's down there with his leg over the edge.
Yes.
And in my head, I'm like, at what point is it going to fly back up? Because he's about to lose a foot if it
Yes. Absolutely. And I had the same thought at the same time. It's like, oh my goodness. But we can talk about the ending in a bit because it's open to mass interpretation. I actually had to go online and read some interviews about how the director wanted that to be interpreted.
Yeah.
But we can get to that. Or
Yeah. One of the things I thought was interesting was the fact that so we wake up and we've got our main character, a chap called Goreng, and he wakes up in his cell and he's sitting. He sits up, and opposite him is an older, portly gentleman called, excuse my pronunciation here,
Trimagasi, I think.
There we go, Trimagasi. And that initially for me, I assumed that they were both prisoners, but it turns out that Goreng is not a prisoner.
No, he's volunteered.
He's chosen to be there. And correct me if I'm wrong, Jamie, my understanding was that he's there to quit smoking, and at the end of 6 months within this place, he gets some diploma.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if the quitting smoking is absolutely spot on, and he definitely gets a diploma. I don't know if that was his main motivation, or as you find out later, there is no smoking allowed in the I don't know what you call it. In the pit, they call it. Actually, wasn't they nicknamed it the pit. There's no smoking allowed in the pit. So I don't know if that was just a byproduct of his actions or whether that was his main motivation. If that's his main motivation or one of them, that's a bit of a severe way to quit smoking. But
But he has no idea, does he?
No. Well, in an interview, before he goes in, the woman who's interviewing him tells him, you can smoke here, but when you're in the pit, you won't be able to smoke in there.
Yeah, but as in he doesn't know that it's as harsh as it is. Like,
oh, I see.
There's no real, in the flashbacks, when we go back to before him going in, there's no inkling there at all that this is going to be a deeply unpleasant experience for him.
In fact, the woman who does the interviewing, as you later see, enters the pit of her own free will. She didn't even know what she was sending people in for. And I think she said that she's been doing it for 8 years. And she had no idea what she was interviewing for. She was just ticking boxes and either approving or not approving people for this place. So I don't think anybody other than those right up top knew what this design was.
Yeah. So the film, interesting is when we start the film, we have this really beautiful shot through the kitchen. Do you remember this?
I'm so glad you went back to that because I found that imagery so... I absolutely loved it. I thought that the contrast between what they're doing, preparing the food, and obviously where that food ends up was amazing. And a huge... The biggest contrast for me was not necessarily how beautiful it looked, because of course it looked, but you got desserts you couldn't possibly imagine and all different types of food. But it was the chefs and the sous chefs' attention to detail. It's like they were creating a banquet for the richest people in the world.
Absolutely. Have you? I'm not sure if you're a Wes Anderson fan, but that opening sequence really. You had Wes Anderson just stamped over it. That imagery was just stunning, and all of them is on scène. You know, look at the staircases and the ovens they're using. Everything was so intricate and beautiful. I didn't know where we were going at this point. Having read the the blurb on Netflix and then having this as my opening sequence, I was going, okay, I'm not sure where this is going.
Yeah. And I think part of it is because the very first floor, so you got floor 0, which is where they set the food, and then it goes down to the first floor. The people in floor 0, they, whilst they're preparing everybody's food, and I don't know if they know how many floors it's going to go through, they're preparing it for floor 1 and floor 1 only. The attention to detail, how it's presented, the professionalism behind it. And even the director's gone on record as saying, yes, it's partly a commentary on the class systems that are still prevalent in society today, but it's very literal in the sense that every other floor, literally from the second floor down, they are only getting the scraps and the leftovers of that very top floor. So it felt to me that they were preparing not for however many floors that they thought there were, but they were only preparing that food for floor 1, and everybody else doesn't matter.
I think just going back to what you were saying there about the whole political thing, I think having read lots of bits and pieces afterwards, I think that's a really interesting aspect of this, because I think it does act as an analogy for the world we live in today, the capitalist world we live in, where the rich get all of the best stuff at the top. And then as we go down through the stages of society, people get less and less and less and less. And I think it's a really interesting comment on the world we live in today. And
especially in recent times.
What exactly? And, we're don't get me started in terms of so just as a bit of context, today is Thursday the 2nd of April, and on last Thursday, loads of people went outside and were clapping for the NHS, and that's really wonderful, and we should be clapping for the NHS, but when the NHS has been so underfunded for so long, God, drives me mad. Anyway,
100%. And just to stay on that point, because it does link into the point that we're talking about now. It's like the way that this is literally reflecting reality is those people who are able to do so can get all the food in the supermarkets, although that's been clamped down a lot now. But you've got people potentially with a lot more money than others buying up all of the cheap stuff, and then you've got families who are usually budgeting like £5 to £10 groceries a week. They have no choice but to buy the expensive food because there's no cheap stuff left. It's like everybody is sort of just going out for themselves.
Exactly, and that is what it's all about. Here. This film just in totally, because there is a moment, isn't there? So when Imagiri, I don't know how you say her name, Imagiri.
I'll have to read it.
I think that's how you say it.
Yeah, Imagiri.
Imagiri. So the lady who is kind of the administrator, she voluntarily goes into the pit, and she ends up in the same cell as Trimagasi. And when they're in the cell together, she's trying to get the people in the lower levels to set aside food. So she has created a plate for them, then they are to create a plate for them below. And the idea is this kind of socialist movement that as the layers go down, the people get food. But it doesn't really work, does it? Because the people who are below are going, well, no, I've been starving for the last month. Actually, I've got food now. I'm going to gorge on it. And there is that selfishness, that idea, and I think we can see it in society, can't we? We see it when people, what I like to call new money, people who go and drive around in these massive Range Rovers and stuff like that, and you go, well, that's going to pollute the environment. Yeah, well, I've got the money, I can afford it. All right, well, crack on then.
yeah. And this is it. It's because if there were a collective understanding of, right, this is a finite amount of resources that we have, and I'm talking about the film here, and you can see how it relates to reality, is that we've got a finite amount of resources here. If everybody were to only take what they require, then everybody would survive and everybody would be able to live. Now you're going to have a lot of people like diehard capitalists say, well, that's socialism and it's tried before and then it's never worked. It's like, the reason it's not worked is because even in a socialist society, including this one here within the pit, it's like, yes, if everybody from floor 48, let's say, divided the food equally to get down to the lower floors, you've still got to try and convince the people at the top. And it's the same with a socialist society. Yes,
Yep.
the community can all band together, and you are seeing lots of micro communities banding together in streets and little hubs of their own with what's going on at the moment. But you've still got to convince the people at the top, and that's the difficulty. Is like,
Yeah.
even in a socialist society, the people who are running how this is going, they're hoarding and they're keeping it for themselves, and so there's not really been that true socialism the same as here. Now, I'm not necessarily one who's saying, hey, we need a socialist society, because, spoiler alert, I run my own business. But at the same time, you've got to look after all the people on the rung of the ladder, because you need the people at the bottom to help the people at the top, and vice versa.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd have to say I was really pleasantly surprised by the film. I was expecting a very two-dimensional,
Mm,
um, the actual. I don't think, for instance, the cover that they have on Netflix, I don't think that does it justice. This
not
film,
at
I
all.
really don't, because this for me was a real solid comment on the world we live in today.
Absolutely.
Brilliant, brilliant.
Now, I also want to flip it to the we're going deep today. There's a lot of religious connotations in this as well. Now, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here, because that's not my ballpark. That's not what I'm knowledgeable about. But the imagery and the dialogue is also very key, I think, to that kind of religious overtone, or undertone, I should say, in the sense that the main character, whose name is Goreng, he's referred to by more than one character as the Messiah. I mean, that's right in your face. So that's not exactly subtle. But also, they're talking about how you've got the three levels. There are the people at the top, there are the people who are here, and the people who are below. And the fact that you can travel between these levels if you try hard enough, and everybody believes that salvation is at the top, is you're looking for that heaven, that earth, and that hell. And if you want to take it further, then the people in the pit are in purgatory until they decide, or they make the decisions, either to try and get themselves higher, or to
Mhm.
kill their cellmates whilst they're on the very bottom rungs. But the biggest thing for me was almost an element of the supernatural, in the sense that, how in the heck does this table work? There are no mechanics, no machinery. It literally just floats between levels, has a mind of its own. Because as you find out, if nobody's alive on that level, it doesn't stop, which is crucial to some of the maths that they're trying to do in the film later on. But it has a really supernatural kind of feel to it. And it was just constantly in the back of my mind. It's like, how is this whole thing set up? How does it know? It's almost like they make the pit and the table a living, breathing character in its own.
Yeah, I thought that for me, as someone who doesn't particularly like sci-fi and that kind of supernatural genre, that for me was one thing that, to start off with, when I was watching the film, I was thinking about that quite a lot. I was like, well, how does this even work? And that's just because that's just me. And I think that within 10 minutes, you become very forgiving and you just let it go, because
Oh,
the
yeah.
actual narrative is so much better, and you kind of engage with it so much more. But that did for a little while. I was thinking about that.
It's something that certainly just fades into the back of your mind, because, as you said, it does all become about the characters. There's nothing um, like, they don't keep coming back to it, and the mechanics of the place and how it works. They don't focus on how any of it works. They're only focusing on what's happening between the characters and what they're attempting to do.
Yeah.
And they birth different goals. So some people want to try and go up to the top, but inevitably they they decide that the best thing actually to do is to ride the table all the way to the bottom. And this is what they were talking about, in terms of, you've got two choices. You can either come together as a collective and work together, which we see doesn't work time and time again, in the sense that they're not plating up the different rations and the portions so that it reaches the lower levels. And so what they have to do is, like, they come to the conclusion, okay, right, let's ride this table to the bottom. Anybody who's going to feed off this table will take only what they eat, or what they have to have, and leave the rest,
Yeah.
or we'll kill them, basically.
Yeah.
And so you've got your differences between your diplomatic way or ruling with an iron fist. It's like you will do what you're told.
Yeah.
But ultimately, the problem is that you can only convince the people below you. You cannot convince the people at the top because you've got no way of getting there.
Yeah. So there's a moment when Goreng is first in the cell with Imogiri, and she's trying to convince the people below to have their share. And she does this for a few days to no avail. And he stands up and he says something along the lines of, if you don't plate it to one side, I'm going to shit in your food.
Yep.
And he says, I'm going to smear every last morsel with it. And all of a sudden, those guys start plating their food because they know, being below, that there's nothing they can do to stop him. But the people above, and I think he says, and like she says, well, how are we going to get the people above? He says, we can't do that because I can't shit upwards.
Yes.
And that's
great line.
And it's such a key point though, because being at the top of his level, he can influence those below him, but he can't influence those above him.
No. And let's talk about the levels for a moment. So for the first few minutes of the film, actually for quite a while, I was trying to figure out how the levels worked. And I was like, okay, cool. So level 0 must be at the bottom and, all the way. But no, it's flipped on its head. Level 0 is right at the top. And after each and every month, you are knocked out by what we assume gas, and you are moved level. But if you and your cellmate survive, you're moved with your cellmate, which I think is quite interesting because it means that you've got time to develop a relationship, and we get to see how those relationships crumble as you get to the lower levels, which is really cool because as is established, when you get to about level 50, level 51, there's no food left because everybody from level 1 to 50 has eaten it all. And we find out through Goreng's first cellmate, Trimagazi, that he's been as low as, I didn't write this down, I wish I had, I think it was at 130 or something. Right. Around about 100, level 130 is like, there's no food down there. And this is the point where you get to, or you find out that you can bring in any item, one item that you want. And our main character, Goreng, brings in a book, which I think is a testament to how he has no idea what he's about to go through.
Yeah.
But you learn that lots of people have brought in things like knives and swords and firearms and crossbows. So it's like, so some people may have more of an understanding of what is actually going on in here than others. Yeah. Which I found very interesting.
I think so, yeah. And I think those people were the people who were in there involuntary, weren't they?
Yes, yeah, because Trimagazi is manslaughter, essentially. He's not an outright murderer. You find out that he was manslaughter in a very unfortunate way.
I thought that was fab. That for me was a bit of lighthearted sadism that I quite liked that.
Yeah, but again, for me, it was a testament to the power of or the quality of the writing and the performance. Because normally, if somebody starts a story like he does, he doesn't just come out and say, "Oh, I threw a TV out a window and it killed an immigrant on the floor below, on the street below." He actually goes through a really long story about how he came to throw that telly out, and I was captivated by every word. And for them, it was just a bit of conversation. I was like, "This is amazing! The writing and the delivery is outstanding."
Yeah. So Trimagazi, that character, I thought was brilliant. And he reminded me, even before we developed further into the story, he reminded me of Hannibal Lecter. So initially, when I saw him sitting on the edge of his bed, this kind of plump little man, he reminded me of Hannibal Lecter so much. And then as the story develops, that just really came into its own.
See, I hadn't made that connection, but now you say it. Yeah, he's very calm. He's very purposeful with everything he says and everything he does. And he has almost an air of wisdom about him. But this is, as you find out, he's been in there for, he's in there for a year. And I think that he was on month 9 or 10 when you first meet him.
Yeah. He said he's only got, is it 1 month after the one he's in or something?
Yeah, so when they wake up, I think he's on his penultimate. And then when they move, that would have been his last month. which, as you find out, he doesn't survive because they're right down on level 100 and
It's
something,
80 or something.
really low. Yeah,
Yeah.
really, really low level,
Yeah.
or high, depending on how you want to look at it, floors or numbers. And he ties he ties up Goreng because he manages to wake up before he does. But the reason being is there's no malice or hatred. It's like, you're a young man. I've experienced the craving of hunger because I had to fast for a month. You will overpower me easily. So I'm going to tie you up and I'm going to feast off of you. I'm going to keep you alive as long as
Yeah.
possible so you don't rot. But for him, it was very much, okay, this is what I have to do.
Yeah.
There's
Absolutely.
no qualms.
And I think that's where the Hannibal Lecter kind of character really, for me, developed further, because he finishes and or ends his sentences with obviously
Yes.
throughout. But it was, he was so normal. Everything was so real in his world, and I really liked that. I thought, I found him one of the most believable characters.
Yeah.
Um,
He's been able to adapt to the situation he's in and he's just
mhm.
accepted it.
Yeah, and everything was really straightforward. Like when he ties him up and he explains why he's tied him up, he just does it in a really kind of matter of fact way, and
Yeah.
I liked that. I thought it was good.
I appreciate that as well. There was no real drama to it. It was like, this
Yeah,
is how it is and this is how
yeah,
it has to be. If I'm going
yeah.
to survive, this is what I have to do.
Hmm.
And, law of survival, you take the emotion out of it. That's what you're left with,
Yeah, yeah,
which was
absolutely.
brilliant. So the way that he managed to get out of that, of course, was as you're introduced to a character earlier on, you're introduced to a character called Miharu, who is a mother that's, as soon as she wakes up in her new cell, she kills her cellmate, and then she rides the table down looking for her, what we believe to be son, as we're told. And when it comes to day 8 of the new cell, um, then Trimagasi has said that on day 8, I'm going to start cutting lumps out of you, and I'll feed some to you, feed some to me, keep you alive, etc. And
Such
as
a
he's doing that,
yeah.
oh, she comes down on the table and you see her again, and that's how he's able to escape, because he was, I don't know, it was almost an incredibly small act of kindness when they met the first time. All he did was acknowledge her existence, but that seemed to have been enough for her to leap off the table and injure Trimagasi fatally, pass the knife to Goreng, and then off
Mm.
um, he finished off his cellmate, Trimagasi, which I also thought was really poignant in the sense that he's finally made the shift from an observer who's trying to do the best to, no, he's killed a man now, and he's making that change from observer to survivor.
And that change to survivor sees him gradually eat pieces
Mm.
of Trimagasi as well. So we see him actually picking off of his body as the month goes on. We see it in this kind of montage as it goes through, and that, I think, really, because we get some flashbacks as well where Trimagasi is kind of almost saying, "I told you so,"
Yeah, yeah.
and I don't know. I thought that was really interesting. Kind of the spirit of Trimagasi was still there.
Well, he's talking to him. He's an hallucination, isn't he?
Hmm.
And he pops up
Yeah.
from time to time, as too does Imaguri when she passes, because when Trimagasi dies and they wake up in the new month,
Hmm.
this is where you get Imaguri as his new cellmate. And
Yeah.
they come together and they're back up on a higher floor, so things are a little better. And this is when she starts to try and convince everybody. But yeah, that initial transformation from going into Survivor, he seems to be taking these characters with him, and it adds to his transformation. And I mean, I've always loved that kind of thing, like the internal workings of the mind and how people might slowly go insane and what that might look like. So when this happens, I love it when they bring this in. It's like, okay, that character's dead, but he's kept him, and
Hmm.
he's still conversing with him as he's going through this horrific thing that he's experiencing.
Well, Trimagasi says, now basically now you've eaten me, I'm now part of you. I'm inside your body, and I'm part of you forever. I think that's an interesting thing, isn't it?
Mm,
Because there are, we're talking about religion, religious groups around the world who actually do believe that. You know, these cannibal tribes that have existed around the world. I don't know if they still exist, but have existed before. That's one of their cultural beliefs. I remember watching one of oh man, what's his name? Bruce someone. He did a series on television called Tribe, where he went and lived with a tribe for a month or so. And he stayed with a group of headhunters. And that was really interesting because they explored that idea of when we eat the more powerful people so that we can become more powerful. And I think that's, you know, a really interesting concept. I'm not saying I want to take part in that.
No, but that's fascinating.
But it's an interesting thought process, which kind of carries on over into that kind of religious narrative that we had before.
It was Bruce Parry, a 2005 documentary called Tribe. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, so I was taught to film by Bruce Parry's cameraman. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, a long time ago. But anyway, amazing series. If you ever get to see Tribe, really worth seeing. But it reminded me of that there, the kind of eating with the people. And you put yourself in those shoes as well. When you're watching this, you go, would I eat someone to stay alive?
Exactly. This is what I was constantly thinking, is how far would I go? But it's one of those situations where you've no idea how you're going to react until you're ever put in that situation, heaven forbid. But I was like, have I got it in me to eat another human being? Yeah. I mean, I'm a meat eater, but that's different. I'm not squeamish when it comes to seeing how my food is prepared and where it comes from. But another human being?
And raw meat as well.
Yeah.
And there's some great, really fantastic close-up and medium shots of Trimagasi cutting bits off and putting them into his mouth.
Yeah.
And that imagery, you know, the close-up you've got of just his fingers going into his mouth with this. It looks like beef jerky, but kind of before it's perhaps been
processed.
Yeah, cured. And so it's putting it into his mouth. Oh, it's gross. It's so disgusting.
But it's very similar. I don't think this was intentional. But it's incredibly similar to the feasting scenes in something like a George A. Romero zombie flick. Yeah. Is like every single Romero flick you see will have a feasting scene, and it's all up close, and you're watching everything go in, and it's incredibly similar in the way that it's shot and the tone of the whole scene. The only thing it's lacking is blood, because of course this is prepared food for them.
Yeah.
But when it gets to the human body, it's very.
That was quite hard to watch, actually. Moments of that, I didn't like that. I really liked the introduction of Baharat. So Baharat turns up. So Goreng wakes up in a new cell because we find out actually that Imogiri kills herself.
Yeah. Which in itself was fascinating, because it's another character that he carries with him, because he starts to see her as well as his other mate.
He eats her as well.
Yeah, he has no choice.
Yeah. So it's, you know, in that sense, that was unexpected. I didn't see that coming at all.
No. But the reason being, and I do apologize because it's just popped into my head, one of the reasons is at this point, Imogiri tells you that there are 200 levels. And in their new month, they wake up on level 202. Mm-hmm. So what I like about this is that you're constantly finding that there are more and more and more levels. And you believe her because she comes from outside. She's worked for this institution. You kind of, even though she doesn't know where she's sending people, she seems to have an idea of the scale of this. Mm-hmm. And so she's like, there are 200 levels. And then they wake up on level 202. And it's like, what? No, there's many more. It's like, okay. And then she, you know, she kills herself, and it's like
she kills herself. But he wakes up with Baharat, and Baharat, I loved it when he's there. He's going, "I'm on fire! I'm on fire! I'm on level 8." Is it level 8 or level 7 or something?
I think it was
like that?
8. Yeah, was it 8 or 6 or something like that?
Something like that.
It was close.
Oh, 6. I think it was 6 because he was going to climb the 5 levels.
That's it. It was 5 levels away.
Yes, he's got the rope, and he manages to convince these horrible racist people above him. So Baharat's a black
Yeah.
man, and the people above him are awful. He throws his rope up, and he's so excited. I love that line. I'm on fire. He's so excited. He's just so great.
He injects a level of energy back into the film that was potentially missing at this point. So it was really nice to have that, because the previous two characters were very solemn, very calm, very leveled. This guy, full of energy.
Yeah.
Loved him.
Yeah, and so anyway, he throws his rope up. He manages to convince them. They take the rope. As he's climbing up, he gets just to the point where he's going to reach up to them, and the guy on the level above drops his trousers and defecates onto his face, causing him to drop the rope. And the moment you see him drop the rope, that absolute heartbreak in him, I really loved that character. I thought he was so good.
I agree, especially given that, I mean, he knows, and so do we as an audience, he will never be, unless he's incredibly lucky, he will never be that close to level 1 ever again. And his chances of escaping that way they're done. His entire goal and motivation has just disappeared, evaporated in a few seconds.
But then Goreng manages to convince, I'm sorry, I'm still trying to keep up with names here, Baharat, that they should do what Imagiri had said and section off the food. But Goreng has this idea that the first 50 levels are getting food. And if they ate yesterday, they can go a day without eating. So they were going to portion off the food for level 50 and below. And they do that, and they tear up their beds, and they've got these like sharp spears and stuff like that, and they go down.
Yeah, it's from the it's like the what do you call it? Not the mattress, but the actual bed itself, isn't it? They make massive
the frame, yeah,
the
big
frame. Thank you.
Frame. Yeah, and they're pulling off these just metal spears, essentially, aren't they? And they go down, and they they have to fight off quite a few people, because the people on those levels, and I could really empathize with the people who were on level 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, who might have been on level 200 last month. They might have just eaten a human being for the last month, and all of a sudden there's this food, and the food is delicious. The food could have its own show itself. It's nice.
Gorgeous.
It's exquisite. And then you just understand these people being told, you ate yesterday, you're not eating today. Just being like, mate, I just ate a person for the last month. I will eat if I want to. And then being fought off. I thought it was, an interesting thing, because let's face it, we're in that position. We're human beings. We're
of course. I mean,
inherently selfish.
Survival is built into us, and we want to make sure that we preserve ourselves and that we continue. It is built into us, and so self-survival, 100%.
So eventually they do go down, and they're going level by level.
Well, before they actually, sorry, carry on. My bad entirely.
No, I was just going to say we go down past level 200 to. I was going to say
I don't know if it's before then, but we meet a character that Baharat knows called Brambang.
Yeah, okay.
If you remember.
Yes, I do.
And I wanted to stop on that because at this point in time, they believe the best way to do this, to break the system, to break the chain, is to make sure that everybody gets fed, including the people at the lower levels, like all the way to the bottom. Due to a bit of quick maths, we know that there are more than 202 levels now, but Goreng says that he's counted the rough time that it takes for it to get to the bottom. Like, he can hear it, and he's counted, and he's estimated there are about 250 levels. So they're trying to ration food for 250 levels now instead of the 200 or 202 that they thought it was. But on their way down, when they're basically telling, like, you get in your corner and you stop eating, and this, that, and the other, they meet a character called Brambang, and he convinces them of something quite different entirely.
Yeah.
He convinces them that the best way to do this is not through brute force, because you're not convincing people, you're dictating to them. And as soon as that power disappears, they'll go back to how they were before. So you have to convince people that this is the best thing for them, which is what I think they tried to do for one level. If I counted, it wasn't very long.
No. But they pick an item, a
Panna cotta, I think it was.
Panna cotta, that's it. And that is going to be the message. So they are going to go down and what's the man's name? The man in the wheelchair?
It's Brambang.
Brambang. So Brambang says you need to send up a message, okay? Take one item down to the bottom and send it perfectly preserved back up to the top. So they preserve panna cotta, and so as they're going down, the panna cotta is the message. And so I'm watching this with subtitles, and it just keeps coming up on screen. The panna cotta is the message. And my wife Alice was sitting next to me. She wasn't watching it. She was doing some work, but kind of just could see it in the background. And she just looked at us and went, "What are you watching?" The panna cotta is the message. But I thought that was really good. So Bahara and Goreng, they look after this as though it is,
as though their life depends upon it.
Yeah, absolutely. And so as it goes down, then they get to room 333, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And
333, because I thought that had some kind of a deeper meaning, which I never found.
Well, I wondered.
Say again.
I thought about this. I wondered if it was halfway to hell.
You see, I had the same thought. Like 666, 333.
Right.
You're only halfway, but they think this is the bottom because they don't see anybody, and it stopped. And as they've previously established, if there's nobody alive on that level, it keeps going.
Yeah. And so anyway, they get there, but all of a sudden it stops in room 333, and they can't understand why, because for the last dozen, probably more levels, they've just carried on through because everybody on that level has been dead. But it stops and they don't know why. And then they discover a young girl hiding under the bed. And I think that was a really interesting moment. And she's clearly very hungry. We don't really know how she survived. She's a bit of a miracle, really.
Especially when you consider how clean she is. It's like she looks like this environment has not touched her in any way.
Yeah. Well, interestingly, so the actor who played Goreng, he lost 12 kilograms in 6 weeks.
Flipping heck.
To play this part. He was working, they were filming, I can't remember. I think it was 10-hour days. I read this. They were 10-hour days.
Wow.
For 6 weeks straight, and he was basically starving himself the whole time to lose that, just so that during that 6 weeks of filming, you see him becoming more and more gaunt, and you really do. It's not a case of makeup. He genuinely has lost that weight.
Oh, I did not know that. That's awesome.
Yeah.
And this young girl who they believe is Miharu's daughter, not Miharu's son, which is what they initially believed. And at one point, they didn't believe that at all. And then, what is it? Goreng gets off the table because they think, oh, we're at the bottom, it's stopped. And Baharat is telling him, no, get back on the table. And he comes off the table, and they find, obviously, they get her out from underneath the bed that they're in, or she's under, I should say. And then the table starts moving again. So not only is 333 not the bottom, it was only staying there to allow that girl to eat if there was any food left, but they also missed their opportunity to get to the bottom this time around because the table's moved on. And as is established earlier, it's about 15 feet from the hole in the ceiling to where the table would stop in the floor below. And I think it was, 1 or 2 floors up. It could have been a great deal more. You see Miharu get murdered by the people on that floor, so Mum's not coming anymore. Yeah. So I don't know if you thought, because I was a little bit confused at this point, does that mean that, and just let me know what you think on this one, the young girl stayed on floor 333, or so she was always at the bottom, or Miharu made that journey every day somehow to get the food to her? So how I couldn't wrap my head around how that worked.
Yeah, I don't know, because so initially I figured that she must be traveling that elevator every day to get to the food, to get to the bottom for her daughter. But I don't know. It's not really explained, is it? And
no. I don't think it's massively important, but it was something
it's almost irrelevant.
Yeah, it is almost irrelevant because it's not the story that it's telling.
No.
But it did bug me. I was like, what?
Yeah. So the next bit then, where we kind of descend to that last moment
Mm.
into essentially what is actually the pit.
Well, Baharat dies first off, so we
Oh,
have to. Yeah, so it's
yes, yes, yes.
just Goreng and the young girl.
Yeah.
Could
And
because
they no longer have the panna cotta. They've given the panna
exactly
cotta
they gave her the
to
panna cotta.
themselves.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and Baharat
And
got
because,
an injury from a katana, a samurai sword, when they were
yeah.
trying to stop Miharu from being murdered.
Mhm.
But that was ill-fated. They both came away with quite severe injuries, and Baharat bled out overnight.
So now the girl is the message. The panna cotta is no longer the message. The
Mm.
girl is. And so Goreng takes her down, and they go into this black pit, um, which for me was just that is hell,
Yeah,
an empty void, nothing there,
nothing there but yourself.
darkness. Yeah, that for me was, it must be hell, must it not?
Well, I think that that's certainly one way that you can look at it, and this is where I had to go online to read interviews with the director, because there was a lot of confusion about the ending. People didn't get it, and I can see why. There's nothing tied up neatly in this film. Now, what is interesting is that Goran gets off the lift or the table, and the table does shoot straight back up with the young girl on it. In what we're given, you never see that girl get to floor zero or the reaction of the people on floor zero should she arrive.
I really wanted that.
But they did film that ending.
You're joking.
No, the director went on record. They filmed that ending, but they took it out because the director wanted it to be open to interpretation. The
Oh, I'm
direct-
gonna have to buy it on
yeah.
DVD now to get the director's cut, because I need to see that ending.
I don't know if they'll bother putting it on there. That's the problem. Even though they filmed it, I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't imagine that there was a tremendous amount of post work needed because it's a very physical set. But
Yeah.
I don't even know if they'd even bother because the director wanted it to be an open ending. He wanted you to interpret it. Now, he said that there's obviously one of the biggest kind of interpretations and one that he kind of falls in line with is the fact that Goreng is actually dead before he gets to the bottom. And what you're seeing of him getting to the bottom and having that conversation is completely just him passing on because he was dead before
Right.
he got to the bottom. So you can't trust any of what you see because it's an interpretation of life after death,
That's interesting.
which I think keys in directly to what you were saying in the sense that you get to the bottom of this pit, that is hell for you.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that is a very key kind of way of looking at it. And that's how a lot of people did interpret it, is that fact Goreng was dead before he got to the bottom. He never
Yeah.
got to the bottom.
Interesting. Yeah. Um, I really, I don't want to say again, I don't want to say I enjoyed this film. I really, really appreciated this film. I thought it was a fabulous bit of filmmaking. Um, Another film where the narrative has led over the visuals of the film.
Really
Um,
strong.
I, I, I really liked it. Really liked it.
I did not expect that. I'm not gonna lie. I was gonna say, I'd seen it. I hadn't seen it when I recommended it for this, I don't think.
Mm,
But I've seen it 3 times now.
right. Okay. I've only seen it the once. I might watch it again with somebody who hasn't watched it, just
Mm,
to kind of have this same conversation with them about the film.
yeah.
Um, but definitely worth watching, I think. Yeah.
All right. I mean, this is one of those films where I could literally sit here for 3 hours and go through it scene by scene. I mean, we're trying to condense it into what an hour or so, but there's so much to talk about, and none of it. Well, I say none of it. Very little of it is the visuals because it's all about what comes through in the dialogue and the characters and their actions. So I'm gonna. This will be my summary then, I suppose.
Go for it.
Overall, I thought that the characters and the actors were incredibly strong. I thought they were really well written, incredibly well rounded, because you got to learn a lot about them with not actually going too much into their backstory. You got to understand their motivations. I really appreciated how small scale this was. it was not a big, massive sci-fi masterpiece that people have tried to do before with this type of setup. You know, they've kept it claustrophobic, and they've focused on the imagery and the characters over how this whole thing works, because that was still something that sticks with me now. It's like, how does the table work? It's like, how is the girl alive? None of that really matters, because it's about your interpretation of what's going on and what you bring to the film. Normally, I try and stay clear of what I bring to the film, but this film begs for you to bring your own interpretation, even with the open ending. So I think that's really important. And that this is one of those films where loads of people can watch it and all have a completely different interpretation, even though the film is set up so simply. I think for something like this to be able to do that is phenomenal. This is definitely one of those types of films that I actively go out and look for. I love this stuff, even with its sort of, I don't know, gory undertones and sometimes really unpleasant scenes to watch. I love how it forces you to think about not only where you're living at the moment in terms of like society and the community that we have, but also different bigger questions. And for me, a film this low scale that is able to invoke you to ask those questions is doing its job perfectly. So for me, I could not recommend this film enough. My only proviso is, without knowing the plot, I would try and understand what you're going to watch first, because it's not an easy film to watch, but I definitely recommend it to anybody who is looking for something like this. Yeah, for sure.
Well, I'm very, very similar to what you just said. I recommend this, but with a caveat that if you are of a nervous disposition, if you are not a fan of gory, graphic horror, give it a miss. There's not a lot of it, but what there is of it is, I think, quite disturbing. Film itself, in terms of storytelling, the narrative, the characters, it's faultless. Um, this is the kind of film that gets passed by when we go to the Oscars and to these big award ceremonies. And actually, the acting, the storytelling trumps most things I've seen from any major studio in the last 10 years. It was really impressive. The visuals, for a low budget film, there's been no expense spared, and because it is so simple, but they've done it so well, and I think that makes it a much more enjoyable viewing opportunity, because what you're looking at does look like it could have been made by a Hollywood production company. It's better told. I would recommend this film. I think that it's if you don't watch it, it's a missed opportunity to see something really unique and very different.
Love it. Absolutely love it. And the good news, obviously, is if you've got Netflix, given that this is now officially owned by them, it shouldn't be disappearing anytime soon,
No, I wouldn't have thought so.
which is really nice. And so,
Yeah,
yeah, 100%, go watch it. Just go watch it. It's brilliant.
yeah, and I think today I was looking earlier. It's at number 6 or something.
Is it?
Yeah, it's done really well. So
Good.
um, I'm hoping it might have jumped up to number 5. I don't know, but yeah, where are we?
Because and it gives me hope to see films like this so popular. Number 4 in films today.
Number 4.
Number
There we
4.
go.
Come on, guys. Come on. Because then it means that these types of films that I think are quite important are still getting made. You go to the cinema at the moment, like independent or those middling budget films are really struggling. It tends to be either your massive multi-million dollar blockbusters or your super, super cheap Blumhouse productions.
Mm-hmm.
But everything in that middle section, which is where I would imagine that this would fall, is being ignored. Now, it's difficult to say where exactly it falls, because Netflix are very cagey when it comes to the budget of films and how much a film actually is viewed and made and that sort of thing. But I would imagine that this was, again, probably somewhere in that middling region, because it doesn't feel super, super cheap, although clearly with only 2 sort of boxes to work from and a little bit of CGI, it
Yeah,
wouldn't cost a huge amount.
I'm thinking the whole film was under $1 million.
You reckon? That
Yeah,
low?
yeah,
Oh,
I
that
do.
blows out the water everything I just said. Because I was thinking maybe, I don't know, it's more around the 10 mark,
Really,
like,
no,
which is really cheap by today's
it
by
is
today's standards.
absolutely. But I think that when you look at what films can be made for, I think that
Mm.
$1 million is, I think, fair in terms of the building of set, in terms of
Mm.
the wages and all that sort of
I
stuff.
mean, to be fair, if they came out and said, yeah, this was only 750,000 or $1 million, it wouldn't surprise me.
No.
But I thought it was probably a bit higher than that. But at the same time, the fact that this is getting the buzz that it is gives me a lot of hope for films of a similar caliber, but with
Yeah,
no money behind it to
yeah.
get made. Because I love Marvel, I love some DC, I love all that stuff. But when I go to the cinema, it's like, I want to see something a bit different. I was one of those that went, probably one of the only ones that went to the cinema to see Belko Experiment. And I absolutely love that film.
Right. Yeah, no,
So I seek these types of things out.
one of my favorite films is a film called Napoleon Dynamite. You've
Oh,
seen
I've
it?
seen that. It's a
All
great
right.
film.
That
Yeah.
film was made on $300,000.
That's
And it
pittance.
was picked up by MTV,
Love it.
who distributed it and turned it, and they've made over 100 million now. So
Oh,
on
easy.
300,000 investment, over
Such a
100.
cult hit.
Oh yeah, amazing.
Absolutely love it.
You know, when that first came out and it was on Netflix offered, I think it was like $100,000 or something, if you could correctly put it into a genre, like fit it into a genre. Where did that film fit? And no one could do it because it's such a weird film. Like, what genre is it? And
You have to create your own genre. That's the problem, isn't
yeah,
it?
yeah.
Ah, anyway, so yeah, that is 2 recommends for the platform. Outstanding. Anything that you'd like to finish off with before we?
Yeah, just this is podcast number 3 now, and we've got a bit of a ball rolling on it, which is great. We're picking up lots of views on YouTube, so lots of listens on Anchor, Spotify. You know, share it. Let people know that you're listening to it. If you're enjoying what you're hearing, please let other people know. We're on Facebook, we're on Instagram, we're on Twitter, we're on YouTube. You know, hit us up, give us some feedback. We'd love to know your thoughts.
Absolutely. One of the best ways that you can help us to do that as well, not only by all the sharing and commenting on posts and what have you, but when because it will be hitting things like iTunes, it's already on Spotify, as mentioned by Andy. There's ranking systems on these things. So if you want to give us like a rank or a recommend or a 5 stars, and then just write a little bit about what you enjoy about it, that really helps us out to get seen amongst all these much bigger podcasts that are out there. So anything you can do is much appreciated. Andy and I started this because we enjoy talking about film and we're in isolation. So we're like, hey, we've got some free time. Let's do. But this is definitely something that we'd like to continue once isolation is over, and all your support really helps.
Love that. Well,
Awesome.
thank you so much for listening again. Really appreciate it.
All right. That's a bye-bye from me, everybody. Take it easy.
Bye-bye from me.